The steady hum of the spaceship's engine vibrated through the floor, a quiet backdrop to Adam's restless thoughts. He leaned against the observation window, staring out at the swirling nebula. Beyond the glass, stars blinked in sharp, white bursts, their light bent and distorted by the space station's gravity field. It was a beautiful sight, but it did little to ease the growing unease in his chest. This wasn't supposed to be his life. Not now, not here. Not with her. The words of his superior officer echoed in his mind, clear and insistent. Lock the door, soldier. It's pairing up season, don't let any of them in. Especially not her. The door. That was the issue. A simple, careless mistake. Forgetting to lock it. He sighed, rubbing his hand over his face as if he could scrub away the tension. He wasn't scared. He'd been through worse. Alien lifeforms were just that, lifeforms. But something about this particular one had been gnawing at him for days now. Something about her had him feeling like the floor might drop out from beneath him. The pairing up season was a sacred time on this station, a period when various species, alien and human alike, partook in bonding rituals. For some, it was a personal choice, for others, it was a political necessity. But Adam knew better than to think of it as anything more than a quiet time of strange customs and odd practices. That's what he told himself. But Lyra was different. Her species, the Azir, was notorious for their telepathic abilities, which extended far beyond the realm of ordinary mind reading. To them, connection was not just physical, it was mental, spiritual. And their pairing up rituals were no simple task. Rumors swirled about the intensity of the bond, how it could either strengthen or break an individual forever. Adam wasn't sure what was worse, the thought of being bonded with someone, or being rejected by them. The door. That's where it all started. A slight noise behind him caught his attention, a soft, almost imperceptible shuffle. He froze. His hand instinctively moved toward the sidearm holstered at his waist. Before he could turn around, the air around him thickened, the temperature dropped by a degree. A slight, yet noticeable, shift in the atmosphere. It was her. Lyra. He didn't have to look to know it was her. He could feel it, like the atmosphere had changed, like the very air around him had drawn in a breath. Are you always this tense, Adam? Her voice was calm, almost serene, as if she weren't standing in the doorway of his quarters. No invitation, no warning. He spun around, his heart hammering against his ribcage. There she stood, framed by the dim light of the corridor, her silhouette striking and ethereal. Her lavender skin shimmered in the soft glow of the lights, a sharp contrast to the darkness of the hallway beyond. Her long black hair hung in thick waves around her face, and her eyes, glowing faintly, met his with an intensity that made his breath catch in his throat. It was unsettling, the way she looked at him. She was beautiful, there was no denying it, but there was something more to her gaze. Something that dug into him, pulling at places he wasn't sure he wanted to acknowledge. Lyra was tall, taller than most women he knew, with a presence that felt more imposing than her physical size. Her people, the Azir, were known for their statuesque beauty, but they were also known for their ability to manipulate emotions, bending others' wills with their telepathic prowess. And that was the part that unnerved him the most. He couldn't trust her. He wasn't sure he could trust himself. You shouldn't be here, he managed, his voice strained as he tried to regain control of his breath. Shouldn't? She stepped forward, closing the distance between them with the grace of a predator. I was invited, Adam. Don't forget. I know you've been warned, but I've never been one to follow orders. Her words were like a soft melody, yet they carried an edge, an implication that went beyond casual conversation. She was in pairing up season, and here, on this station, that meant more than just a desire for company. The weight of her gaze intensified as she stepped closer. The tension in the room thickened, the air almost charged with static, as if the space itself was reacting to her presence. He swallowed hard, and for a brief moment, he found himself paralyzed by the raw power she exuded. What do you want? Adam asked, his voice low, despite his effort to stay calm. Lyra's lips curved into a smile that was anything but comforting. I'm here to complete my ritual, Adam. And you, well, you're the perfect candidate. Her voice was soft, but there was no mistaking the undercurrent of something far more dangerous beneath it. Her words hit him like a jolt of electricity, but his instincts were sharper than his shock. He took a step back, his mind racing. Don't get involved. Don't fall for this. She's dangerous. But she was already inside the room, moving past him with the effortless grace of someone who knew their power all too well. He could smell the faint scent of her, something like cinnamon and ozone, sweet but biting. She was too close now, close enough that he could feel her warmth, the faint hum of her energy brushing against his skin. His pulse quickened, but it wasn't fear, it was something else. Something far more dangerous. Her eyes locked onto his again, and this time, there was no hiding the intensity of the connection. He felt it, deep in his chest, like a thread being pulled taut between them. I've been warned about you, Adam muttered, his voice a whisper. And yet, she replied, you still didn't lock the door. The words lingered in the air between them, an undeniable truth hanging in the balance. He had been warned. And now, there was no turning back. Adam stood still, frozen in place, as the quiet hum of the station's air filtration system filled the oppressive silence between him and Lyra. Her presence was like a shadow, following him even when she wasn't close. He could feel her, the way her energy rippled through the room, touching every corner, even though she hadn't moved a step closer. What are you really after? He finally asked, the words coming out sharper than he intended. He was done with the games. He had to be. Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she let the tension build, savoring it, as if waiting for him to say more. Her eyes, their faint glow pulsing with that hypnotic intensity, never left his face. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with something unspoken, a kind of power that pressed down on him, making it harder to breathe. Adam could feel the prickling heat of her gaze on his skin, like a subtle burn. You already know what I want, Adam, she said at last, her voice soft but sharp, cutting through the space between them. What I've always wanted. The words sank deep into his chest, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. This was no longer a simple encounter. She wasn't just any alien species doing her duty, completing some ritual. No, this was different. She had targeted him. And worse, he had let his guard down. Lyra was still standing near the doorway, but somehow, she seemed to dominate the entire room. She didn't need to move to make him feel like she had him cornered. There was a subtle force to her presence that was almost magnetic. She knew how to use it, how to manipulate it, and she knew how to use it on him. It wasn't physical proximity that mattered, it was something deeper, more primal. Do you want me to be honest, Adam? She asked, taking a deliberate step forward. I came here for you. You. Not because of some ritual, not because I was told to. But because you've been on my mind since I first saw you. Adam's heart skipped a beat. He knew she was dangerous. He could feel the raw power radiating off her, but he hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected her to be so direct. So unashamed of her intent. He swallowed, forcing his hand to unclench from the sidearm at his waist. A quick, unnecessary motion. But it gave him a semblance of control in this uncontrollable situation. You think you can just walk in here and, what, claim me? His voice was low, the tension in his chest rising with each word. Lyra's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't a smile of amusement. It was something far more dangerous, something that felt as if it belonged to someone who had always gotten what they wanted, no matter the cost. Oh, Adam, she whispered, taking another step toward him. I don't claim anyone. I don't need to. I simply connect. The word hit him like a blow. His skin tingled with the unspoken promise, his heart racing in response. Connect. It was more than just a bond, it was a melding of minds, a sharing of thoughts, emotions, and desires. The Azure species didn't do things halfway. When they formed connections, they were deep, irreversible, binding. There was no going back once the bond was forged. The thought of it made him want to retreat, to put up walls, to barricade himself away from her influence. But the truth was, his body didn't want to move. It didn't want to escape. Every inch of him was drawn to her in a way he couldn't explain, like gravity had shifted and pulled him into her orbit. "I'm not here to make it easy for you, Lyra," Adam said, trying to regain some sense of control over the situation. "You've got the wrong idea if you think you can just walk into my life." Lyra tilted her head slightly, as if amused by his resistance. She crossed the room slowly, each step measured, deliberate. The distance between them shrank with every moment, her presence becoming more overwhelming, more suffocating. "I'm not asking for permission, Adam," she said, her voice soft but filled with an undeniable authority. "I'm telling you. You're not going to walk away from this. And you're going to want it. We are going to want it." Her words were a strange mixture of certainty and command. They slid into his mind like a slow-burning fire, igniting something inside him that he couldn't extinguish. His chest tightened, and before he could stop himself, he was closer to her than he ever intended to be. "You think you have control of this situation?" he asked, his voice hushed but laced with challenge. Lyra's expression softened, just a fraction, but there was no mistaking the power in her gaze. "I don't need control, Adam. You're already halfway there." Her words landed heavily between them, and Adam's resolve wavered for the briefest of moments. She was right in a way. He had already crossed the line, without realizing it. He had let her in, the first crack in his armor already showing. He took a step back, shaking his head as if to clear the fog that had settled over his mind. "No. I'm not falling for this." Lyra smiled again, that same knowing smile that chilled him to his core. "You will. It's not a choice." He opened his mouth to argue, but the words got stuck in his throat, as if his body had betrayed him. He wanted to push her away, to stand firm, but every fiber of his being was telling him the opposite. The attraction, the pull, was too strong. He was helpless against it. Lyra stepped even closer, her presence now overwhelming, her body just inches away from his. The proximity sent a surge of electricity through his veins, making him acutely aware of every breath, every heartbeat. The world around them felt like it had paused, as if they were the only two beings left in existence. She lowered her voice, her breath warm against his ear. "I'll be here tomorrow. And the day after. You can try to lock me out, but you'll always remember this moment." Her words hung in the air like a prophecy, and as she backed away, the chill of her absence felt colder than the heat of her presence. The door had been left open. And now, there was no going back. The hum of the station's automated systems was the only sound in the darkened room. Adam sat at the console, his hands hovering over the control panel, but his mind was far from the task at hand. The blinking lights, the steady pulse of the monitors, it all felt distant, almost irrelevant. The real storm was the one he couldn't control, the one that had set up camp in his chest since Lyra's visit. The echo of her words still rang in his mind, each one laced with a certainty that shook him to his core. "You're already halfway there." It was a truth he couldn't escape. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. He hadn't just let her in, he had invited her. The temptation to see where this dangerous path would lead was almost unbearable. He gripped the edge of the console, his knuckles white. There had to be a way to shut this down, to control the chaos that was Lyra. But every time he tried to push her from his mind, her presence filled the gaps, flooding him with the image of those glowing eyes, that sharp smile, that voice that sank deep into his very soul. Before he could stop himself, he stood and moved toward the door. He didn't even know what he was doing. He just knew he needed to find her. The hall was quiet as Adam walked briskly through the station. He passed empty corridors, rooms where the team worked late into the night, their activities like whispers in the background. But he wasn't focused on them. His entire world had narrowed to one thought, Lyra. As he rounded the corner, his eyes caught a figure standing at the end of the hall. She was leaning against the wall, one leg crossed casually over the other, arms folded loosely across her chest. The moment their eyes met, the air shifted, dense, heavy, as if time itself slowed to accommodate her presence. Lyra didn't move, didn't speak. She didn't need to. The magnetic pull between them was undeniable. The desire, the tension, it was all there, alive in the space between them. Adam's breath caught in his throat. There she was, a vision of beauty, power, and danger, all wrapped in one impossibly stunning form. Her hair fell in waves down her back, dark and gleaming, with a sheen that reflected the station's dim lighting. Her face, pale and perfect, was framed by the shadows, but it was her eyes, those glowing, otherworldly eyes, that captured him entirely. "I thought you'd be harder to find," Adam said, his voice betraying his composure. He hated the way his pulse raced when he spoke to her, the way she made him feel like he was standing on the edge of something far greater than he was. Lyra raised an eyebrow, her expression one of amused interest. "You think you can hide from me, Adam? I know exactly where you are, at all times. Don't pretend you don't know that." Her words, cold and sharp, had an effect on him. She was toying with him, pushing his limits, but there was something in her tone that spoke to the primal, uncontrollable force between them. Adam clenched his fists, forcing the tightness in his chest to loosen. "I'm not going to play along with whatever game you think this is," he said, voice firm, though his heart thundered in his chest. He took a step toward her, his feet almost moving of their own accord. "I don't trust you. I don't care how many times you try to make me believe you have me figured out. You don't." Lyra uncrossed her arms and took a deliberate step forward, closing the distance between them with ease. The subtle power she radiated seemed to grow stronger with every move she made. She didn't need to speak. Her presence, her nearness, was enough to leave him breathless. "You don't trust me, Adam?" Her voice was a soft murmur, but the way it vibrated through his very bones told him she was playing a deeper game than he could understand. "That's too bad. I was hoping you'd be smarter than that." He tried to keep his composure, to hold on to the last shred of resistance, but the pull of her, the way she drew him in, was overwhelming. "You think I'm just going to fall into your trap?" His voice wavered for the briefest second, but he caught himself. "I've seen what your kind does. I know what you want." A faint smile played at the corner of her lips. "And what is it that you think I want?" He was caught off guard by the question, and his mouth went dry. He had a million answers, but none of them felt right. The truth was, he had no idea what she truly wanted. He only knew that whatever it wasn't something he could control. Lyra reached up, a slow, deliberate movement, and touched his chest lightly with her fingertips. The contact was electric, a jolt of energy that shot through him, making his heart beat harder, faster. The warmth of her touch spread from where her fingers rested, seeping into his skin like liquid fire. She leaned in, her breath warm against his ear. "You're already a part of me, Adam. You just don't realize it yet." His body stiffened at the words. His mind screamed for him to push her away, to regain control, but the desire to stay close to her, to feel that connection, was stronger than his willpower. He wanted to run, but he couldn't. He was trapped by the weight of her presence, by the pull of something he couldn't define. "Don't fight it," Lyra whispered, her lips brushing against his skin as she spoke, sending a shiver down his spine. "You want this as much as I do. And deep down, you know you need it." Her words were like a promise, and a warning. Adam's thoughts scattered as the storm of desire and fear raged inside him. He was standing on the edge of something irreversible, and yet, every part of him wanted to leap. "Tell me, Adam," she continued, pulling back just enough to meet his eyes. "What will it take for you to admit that you've already chosen this path?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, but the silence between them felt charged with the truth neither of them was ready to face. Adam's heart pounded against his chest, and the world around them seemed to fade away. And then, just as quickly as she had closed the gap between them, she turned and walked away, leaving him in a cloud of heated air and unanswered questions. The storm had only just begun. The station hummed with the same mechanical precision it always did, but tonight, the constant beeping and whirring felt like a distant backdrop. Adam couldn't escape the images of Lyra. Even now, as he sat at his desk, staring at endless streams of data, his mind was consumed by her, a haunting presence he couldn't push aside, no matter how hard he tried. His fingers tapped restlessly against the edge of the table. The world outside this sterile environment felt far away. He couldn't shake the sense that the walls were closing in, not from the pressure of the mission, but from the force pulling him toward Lyra, like a storm he couldn't outrun. The thought of her voice, soft but laced with an undeniable power, came rushing back. "You're already a part of me, Adam. You just don't realize it yet." He stood up abruptly, pushing the chair back. He couldn't stay in this room any longer. His mind was a whirl of conflicting thoughts, a battle between his training, his instincts, and the overwhelming attraction he felt toward Lyra. It was more than physical, he knew that. There was something deep within her that stirred something in him, something primal, something buried beneath layers of control. And that was what terrified him the most. He strode through the corridor, each step echoing in the silence of the station, but his thoughts were a jumble of urgency and need. His heart pounded louder with every moment, every step toward the inevitable confrontation. When he reached the observation deck, the large glass windows provided a panoramic view of the vastness beyond. Stars glittered in the black abyss, their brilliance contrasted by the cold expanse of space. The emptiness out there mirrored the sense of isolation he'd been fighting since he first met her, since she made him feel something he couldn't define, couldn't control. And then, there she was. Lyra stood at the edge of the deck, her silhouette framed by the star-filled backdrop. The soft light from the station bathed her in a glow that only seemed to enhance her otherworldly beauty. It was as if she didn't belong to this world at all. Adam's breath caught in his chest. She didn't turn to face him, but her presence was a weight he could feel pressing down on him. The air between them was thick, charged with the tension of what they both knew was coming. "Lyra!" he called out, his voice steady but strained. She slowly turned, her eyes locking with his, glowing like molten gold, yet colder than anything he had ever experienced. A smile tugged at the corner of her lips, a knowing, confident smile that sent a ripple of unease through him. "You were looking for me," she said, her voice a melody of calm assurance. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. And she was right. He had been looking for her, whether he liked it or not. "I don't know what to do about you," Adam admitted, his voice rougher than he intended. "Every time I think I can forget, I can't. It's like you're in my head, taking over every thought, every decision." Lyra took a step closer, the subtle sway of her movements almost hypnotic. "You don't have to do anything, Adam. You're already here. You've already made your choice, whether you realize it or not." He swallowed hard, the truth of her words cutting through him. He had been running from this pull, from the undeniable magnetism that seemed to bind them together. But with every passing moment, he realized that resistance only made the draw stronger. "Why me?" he asked, his voice quieter now. He didn't want to ask. He didn't want to hear her answer. But the question slipped out before he could stop it. Lyra studied him with a mixture of curiosity and something darker, something he couldn't place. "Why not you?" she asked, tilting her head slightly, as though considering him in a new light. "You're strong, capable, more than what you seem. And I've always been drawn to what's real, what's raw. You're not pretending. That's something rare." Adam felt a shiver run through him. Was it admiration in her words, or something more dangerous? He didn't know, and that was part of the problem. She was a mystery, and he wasn't sure he wanted to unravel her, but he also couldn't seem to walk away. He moved closer, his steps slow and deliberate. "You keep pushing me to the edge. But I'm not like you, Lyra. I don't want what you're offering." Her eyes softened, but only for a fraction of a second. "You're lying to yourself? You do want it. You need it. You're already changing. You feel it, don't you? The way I make you feel. The way your body responds to mine without you even trying." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He felt it, the need, the want, the pull toward her. It was all-consuming, and the harder he fought it, the stronger it became. She was right. He could feel his resolve crumbling, piece by piece. "You're dangerous," he said, his voice low, barely a whisper. And I hate that I can't seem to stay away from you. Lyra's smile widened, a mixture of triumph and something more intimate flickering in her gaze. Good, she murmured, stepping even closer, closing the last bit of distance between them. Because the moment you admit that, Adam, is the moment everything changes. And it's already too late. Before he could respond, her fingers brushed against his chest, sending a jolt of electricity through his veins. It wasn't the touch itself, it was the intention behind it. The promise of something more. The tension between them was suffocating now. Adam's heart thundered in his chest, and his breath caught in his throat as he stared at her, waiting for the next move, the next revelation. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, Lyra stepped back. Her eyes lingered on him for a moment longer, her gaze unreadable, before she turned and walked away, her steps silent in the vast expanse of the station. Adam stood there, frozen, his chest tight with the weight of unspoken words, unfulfilled desires, and a growing sense that he had just crossed a line he couldn't uncross. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot.